In this episode, I'm going to show you how to generate your very own MACD zero cross strategy signals. There's a couple of things that you need in order to be able to complete this episode. The first thing you need is the ability to get your own candlestick data, also known as OHLC data, from an exchange of your choice. I'll be using MetaTrader 5, and on this channel, I've previously demonstrated how to get that data from MetaTrader using Python. The second thing that you need is the ability to generate your own MACD indicator and the three parts that go with it: the MACD line, MACD signal line, and histogram. In a previous episode, I also showed you how to be able to do that, and I've linked both of those episodes in the description. Once you're able to get all of that information, let's continue. This is the final episode in my series on the MACD indicator. While we don't have time to go through all of the information about the MACD, I did want to share a couple of pieces of information which hopefully shed a little bit more light on how the strategy works. I'll start by talking about the MACD line. As you're probably aware, the MACD line is generated from the difference of the inputs of two exponential moving averages to the MACD indicator. The MACD line is a measurement of the difference between those two EMAs and effectively kind of shows you what's happening with them and how they're sort of marrying up. The second thing to realize is that as part of that measurement, you can have positive and negative values. And in fact, the MACD kind of oscillates around a zero value. When we talk about the zero cross strategy, then we're talking about what happens when the MACD line goes above the zero line and then when it goes below the zero line. Typically speaking, the MACD generates a buy signal when it crosses above the zero and a sell signal when it crosses below the zero. And if you want to hear more information about how that works, absolutely refer to the episode I did on all about the MACD. Now, I did want to point out one thing before we get into this. Just be aware that the signals that I'm generating in this particular strategy are really just arbitrary values. The take profit, the stop loss, the buy stops and sell stops, I really just put in arbitrary values with no testing whatsoever, just to demonstrate how to do it. I highly recommend that you test it for yourself before implementing any buys and sells based on this information. Let's get into the code. Start by creating a file where you're going to store the MACD zero cross strategy. Now, I'm choosing to do this in my file system because it integrates with my algorithmic trading bot. Absolutely feel free to do wherever that works for you. We're going to call a file EMA underscore zero underscore cross underscore strategy.py. Super creative, I know. And to get started, let's import the libraries that we'll be using. The two libraries or pseudo libraries that I'll be using are a MetaTrader 5 library or MT5 library and a indicator library. Both of those I've developed in previous episodes. And I'm sure if you're following this, you've probably got your own ways of doing it, or you can use the code that I've provided previously. These are simply to get the information that we need and then to calculate the indicators that we need. Now, for all of my strategies, I have a very similar structure that I use to put them in. First of all, I create an overarching function which captures the various steps that we need to go through. The ones that we'll be covering on this particular episode are getting the data, calculating the indicators, and then calculating the signals. While we won't cover this, in other episodes what I've demonstrated is the ability to take a signal and turn it into an actual buy or sell trade action on MetaTrader. So for the MACD, we have several pieces of information that we need to pass it. The first one is the symbol, which hopefully is obvious. That can be the cryptocurrency, Forex, stock, whatever you happen to want to trade. Then we need the time frame that you want to generate your MACD on. And then we have the default values for the MACD, which is the MACD fast, which is the fast EMA, the MACD slow, which is the slower EMA, and then we have the MACD signal. All of these pieces of information allow the MACD to be calculated, and I've put in the default values that are commonly used whenever the MACD is in operation. I absolutely recommend that you do some backtesting with these values, as you may find that different particular symbols have their own kind of MACD optimal values. Now, with all of my code, I like to make sure that it's fully commented. That helps me to build code that is reusable, and I can kind of, come back in 6 months and see what I've done. And I like to think of it as being awesome to future me. It's almost like paying it forward, but to myself, and hopefully for anyone who's reading my code on GitHub. All of this code, by the way, is available on my GitHub, and I've chucked the link to it in the description. All right, here I'm just commenting for each of the different parameters, what they are and kind of what they indicate. And then we'll get into some code. Now the exchange is there because you can add any exchange that you want. And in future episodes, I'll probably put in things like Binance or Alpaca.markets. If you've got your own exchange and figured out your own API on how to interact with them, feel free to add it in. All right, what I want to do here is I want to outline the pseudocode that I'll be using in order to generate the signals. So step number 1 is going to be to get the data that I need. So that'll be the symbol, time frame, and from the exchange that I want to get it from. That function will be called getData. The second step will be to take that data, which will be returned as a data frame, and calculate the indicators that I'm going to need in order to generate my signals. For this particular one, we're going to have 2 indicators, the MACD indicator, and then we need a second indicator which indicates when the MACD line crosses the 0. And I'll show you how to do that later on. The third step will be then to calculate the signals from the 0 line crosses. Once again, they're purely fake values that I've put in there, but we do need a function in order to generate those signals. If we wanted to take this a little bit further, we could then create a function which takes the signal and turns it into an actual trade, doing things like calculating the volume, or if you're trading foreign exchange, you might want to calculate the lot size. And that would be called make trades. So let's go through and kind of put in placeholders for each of these functions. Now, you will notice as I'm going through this that that PyCharm is going to throw up some errors and underline with a little red squiggly line these functions. And the reason for that is because I haven't actually declared these functions anywhere just yet. They are placeholders, and that means that for the rest of this episode, we'll be going through and starting to fill out each of those functions. So our getData function is going to take 3 arguments: the symbol, time frame, and the exchange that we want to use. Our calc signals function, calc indicators function is going to take the following signals. Okay, so we'll take our data frame, which will be returned from getData, and then we'll pass it in all of our MACD values, the fast, slow, and signal sizes. And then in our third step, we'll be calculating our signals from the indicators. Now, I'm only going to put in one indicator here, one parameter here, which is the data frame, but you could absolutely expand this to include things like changing your take profit and stop loss ratios, and how many pips they are below, or however you want to do it. That could be a really great way to take that and run it through something like backtesting.py and see what the optimum values are for a given symbol. And finally, at the end of this, we want to return the data back to the calling function. So let's have a look at our get data function. This should be really familiar for anyone who looked at my previous episode, which was the MACD crossover function. It's effectively exactly the same. You could make a good argument here that maybe this should be kind of shuffled off into like a helper kind of library or something like that. The reason I've kept it here is that like different exchanges, can have weird things that they do, and I kind of feel like it's probably going to be strategy dependent. Um, I don't know, like it's kind of a call that you can make. It certainly would probably save you a little bit of rewriting of code, but you may have to make the get data function a bit more complex. I'll leave that up to you. For now, it's all going to be in the same file. Now, a quick note here that's particularly relevant for the MACD. Because you're using exponential moving averages, you really want to make sure that you retrieve enough candlesticks to kind of make it work. Now, a rule of thumb that I always use whenever I'm calculating exponential moving averages is to make sure that I have at least 5 times as many candlesticks as the EMA size that I'm calculating. For something like this, where the default values are 12 and 26, I mean, it's a bit of an overkill. You might not need that many. But if you wanted to use an EMA 200 as your slow, then you really want to make sure you're getting at least 1,000 candles. Now, why that's relevant is that for exchanges like Binance, which are purely cloud-based, a lot of the times they will have limits on how many candlesticks you can retrieve at any given time. And you need to make sure that you can retrieve enough to make sure that your MACD calculation is accurate. Okay, so we put in there if the exchange is equal to MT5, retrieve the data. You can add in extra exchanges as you need. And if an exchange is entered that there's no kind of call to or reference to, then we're going to raise an error and tell ourselves why this isn't going to work. Okay, then we return the data back to the calling function. So we've taken care of step 1. Let's get into step 2. Now, like I said, step 2 is about calculating the indicators. And we actually need 2 indicators for this particular strategy. The first one is the MACD itself, and the 3 pieces of information that goes with. Even though we only really need the MACD line, the MACD indicator that you get from TAlib is going to give you all 3 anyway. There's no real downside to calculating it, so we'll use all of them. But the second thing you need then is a MACD zero cross. So you need to know when the MACD line crosses below the 0 line. And so what we're going to do after I've defined this function and added in my comments, I'll actually show you how to generate that 0 cross indicator. Now, like I said, all of this code is contained on my GitHub repository, and the link to the GitHub repository is in the description. So if you need that, absolutely feel free to. And just a quick shout out that I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel. It really helps me as a creator. And also, I just really enjoy what I do. And I guess a subscriber count is a really cool way to see that I'm continuing to make an impact. All right, so the first thing, now that we've kind of got all our comments done, we're going to calculate the MACD indicator. This should be really simple for anyone who's following these episodes, because all we're going to do is just refer to our indicator underscore library or underscore lib and calc MACD. Pass it all of the values for the MACD, fast, slow, and signal, and it'll return it to us. If you haven't done that, either you can refer to that previous episode or just generate your own way of calculating the MACD. And I absolutely can recommend TALib or TALib Python, both excellent libraries that you can use to generate your MACD. Now we need to calculate our zero cross. And to do that, we're going to have to head back over to the indicator library or indicator lib to do that. Now, if you're not following this, you absolutely can just put this at the bottom of the file here. You don't have to put it in indicator underscore lib. I'm putting it here because it makes my code super reusable for future episodes that I might want to share. Okay, so a zero cross is pretty simple. All we want to do is we want to take a column, any given column from a data frame, and calculate when that value goes from above zero to below zero or from below zero to above zero. And we can pretty much use the exact same way that we calculated two columns in a data frame crossing in previous episodes. So that's really straightforward. So let's put in the comments and then I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so the pattern for how we do that is as follows. The first step is to create two extra columns on the data frame. One is the position and pre-position. Then we create the position column in such a way that we compare it against a value, in this case 0, and we say, are you above 0? If yes, then put true. If no, put false. The pre-position column then is the position column shifted by 1. Now, as you can probably imagine if you plotted it out in your head, if we have a above 0, which is equal to true, and a pre-position which is above 0, then no cross has occurred. However, if you have an above 0, which is true, and then an above 0, which is false, that means that a cross has occurred. And all we do in this function is do exactly that. And because it's all done through data frames, it's really, really fast. Then we finish the function, which you'll see in a couple of minutes, by getting rid of the position and pre-position columns and simply returning a zero cross column. There you can see I do a quick little lambda function using NumPy. I've also dropped the NA, which is the any values that come through that are not applicable, or NA, get dropped. And I'm going to remove the position and pre-position and return the result. So let's head back to our strategy file. All right, so let's add in our MACD zero cross indicator. Like I said, I'm using a library, a pseudo library in this instance, just to make my code super reusable. I can now use that zero cross indicator for pretty much any other function I might ever want to do when I'm trading. That just saves me a lot of time in the future. And the column we're going to be comparing it against is the MACD. All right, we want to return that data frame back to our main function. Sorry, back to our overarching function. Main function's a bit different. Cool, we've completed step 2. Now let's calculate step 3. Now I'll just reiterate this one more time. Like I said, the values that I'm using for take profit, stop loss, and for your buy stop and sell stops here are purely arbitrary. I haven't done any testing on them. I haven't run it through any sort of back tester or anything like that, nor have I traded with them. I really just wanted a way to demonstrate how they work. So please, please, please make sure that you kind of generate your own values for these. Okay, so in this particular function, what I'm going to do first is to add in some blank columns for order type, stop price, stop loss, and take profit. That's simply just to make sure that the data frame is complete and we don't have bits of the data frame that don't have any values in them. Now, I'll go back in a moment and fix this. You can see there I put in the double equals sign. I don't know, I must have gotten confused that I was building a function or something, but obviously we want the data frame columns to equal that value, not to test it against that value. Okay, now we're going to iterate through our data frame and start to generate our signals. So first thing we want to do, see if 0 crosses equal to true. If it is, then we're going to continue. Now, because we're looking at a zero cross, it makes testing the MACD direction the zero cross direction from the MACD quite simple. Basically, if the MACD is less than zero, we're going to have a sell stop. If it's greater than zero, it's going to be a buy stop. The stop price then is going to be equal, excuse me, for a sell stop, the stop price is going to be equal to the low of the previous candle. You can see there I forgot to put in my comments. So I've gone ahead and started adding them back in. And then because we're using a one-to-one distance, to get the take profit, all I do is I get the distance between the stop price and the stop loss and add it back on. Sorry, in this case, subtract it back onto the stop price. All right, for our buy stop, I'm going to do the exact opposite. Okay, stop loss is going to be the previous candle's low. The stop price is the previous candle's high. Okay, the take profit then will be the distance between the stop price and the stop loss, added back onto the take profit in this case because it's a buy stop. And then I'm just going to add in some comments there just to show you where you need to update your information in order to kind of calculate your own stop price and stop loss values. Now we want to go through and update the data frame with the values that we've just calculated. And we return the completed data back to our function. Now, you could technically run that function as it was, and most of the time it would work. However, the problem will be when you try to call the very first row of that data frame. Because our take profit and stop loss values are based upon the previous row's value, if you're using the 0th row of that data frame, it'll actually return an error. So to get past that, all we're going to do is just put in a couple of lines of code that tell the for loop to only work after it's past the 0th row. So on the first row, which is the second row of the data frame. For those of you who know programming, that'll all make sense. But basically, you just want to add this in to make your code a lot more stable. Let's finish up by updating our main function to see what we can find. We'll head back to main.py, and as you'll see as I go through it, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's really just the skeleton of me being able to get the data from MetaTrader 5, start MetaTrader 5, make sure it's logged in properly, and all the rest of it. As long as you've got a function that allows you to connect the data and retrieve it from your exchange, you should be fine. All right, so I start by importing the strategy that we've just built. Okay, now I'm just going to create a variable and call that strategy. Okay, then we're going to print that to the screen. Here we go. You can see one there, row 34 was a buy stop. That's not really very useful in order for us to see what's happened. So we're going to go back to that main function and update it to only extract the data frame rows where the cross is equal to true. The 0 cross is equal to true. We'll print that to the screen. Let's see what we get. How good is that? A whole bunch of buy and sell stops.